The SEAL compound was under full assault when Lieutenant Hayes realized their only qualified sniper was the quiet weapons instructor they'd dismissed as just range safety. Staff Sergeant Kate Morrison had been running the marksmanship range at Forward Operating Base Warhorse for 8 months, a posting that most special operations snipers considered career purgatory. The SEAL teams rotated through for qualification shoots, treating her with professional courtesy that barely masked their dismissal. She wasn't operational, wasn't deployed forward, wasn't in the fight. She was the safety officer who checked targets and logged scores, while the real operators did real work. The base itself sat in Iraq's Diyala province, a region where insurgent activity had intensified throughout the spring of 2007. The compound housed a rotating SEAL platoon, Army logistics personnel, and a small security force. Kate's range occupied the northeastern sector, berms and target arrays stretching toward empty desert. She'd built it herself with Army engineers, designed sightlines for shots out to 1,000 meters, created a training facility that replicated the engagement distances these operators would face outside the wire. The SEALs appreciated the range, but not particularly her. She was Army, not Navy. She was support, not combat. She'd deployed twice to Afghanistan with the 75th Ranger Regiment as a designated marksman before cross-training to Special Forces. But that was years ago. Now she was 31, running a range, watching younger operators hone skills she'd once used in combat. Lieutenant Hayes had thanked her for her work exactly twice in 8 months, both times with the tone of someone acknowledging a clerk who'd filed paperwork correctly. The attack came at 0347 hours on a moonless night when most of the base was asleep. Kate was in her hooch reviewing training schedules when the first explosion shattered the perimeter wall on the western side of the compound. The blast was massive, probably a vehicle-borne IED driven directly into the concrete barriers. Before the sound finished echoing, small arms fire erupted from multiple directions. The base was under coordinated assault, and from the volume of fire, the enemy had committed significant forces to the attack. Kate grabbed her gear with practiced efficiency, body armor, helmet, weapon. Her M110 semi-automatic sniper system was already assembled, maintained to perfection, because idle hands on a quiet base meant obsessive equipment care. She'd loaded 10 magazines that afternoon out of habit. Muscle memory from deployments when being prepared wasn't optional. The compound's emergency lights flickered on as she moved toward the door, casting harsh shadows across the plywood walls. Outside, tracers cut through the darkness like angry fireflies, incoming rounds snapping overhead with sounds she hadn't heard in 3 years. The Tactical Operations Center was chaos when she arrived. Lieutenant Hayes stood over a radio, his face illuminated by screen glow, coordinating with the tower guards. 2 SEALs were suiting up while another worked communications. Hayes looked up as Kate entered, his expression moving through surprise to dismissal in half a second. "Morrison, get to the bunker with the support personnel," he said, already turning back to his radio. The assumption was automatic. She wasn't an operator anymore, wasn't someone who belonged in the fight, was just the range instructor who happened to be present during an actual emergency. Kate ignored the order and moved to the tactical display showing the compound layout. Red markers indicated enemy contact points. Western wall breach, northern perimeter, 2 positions along the eastern fence line. Approximately 40 insurgents based on thermal imagery from the remaining functional tower. The SEAL Quick Reaction Force was pinned down near the motor pool, taking fire from elevated positions outside the wire. "You've got shooters in those buildings, 500 meters northwest," she said, pointing to the screen. Hayes glanced at her with irritation. "I'm aware, Morrison. Bunker. Now." One of the SEALs, a chief petty officer named Vickers, whom Kate had qualified last month, spoke up from where he was checking his rifle. "Sir, our designated marksman took shrapnel in the first blast. He's combat ineffective." The words hung in the room for 2 seconds. Hayes processed this, his jaw tightening. The compound had exactly 1 sniper-qualified operator assigned, and he was currently being treated by the medic for wounds that had him out of the fight. The nearest backup was at another FOB 40 minutes away. Assuming they could even launch a quick reaction force through hostile territory in darkness, Kate spoke before Hayes could respond. "I can take the range tower. It's got clear sight lines to those northwestern buildings and the breach point. Elevated position, reinforced structure, good angles on their flanking positions." Hayes stared at her like she'd suggested something absurd. "Your range safety, Morrison. This is a hot combat situation, not a training exercise." His tone carried the weight of every assumption he'd made about her for 8 months. That her operational days were behind her, that her current assignment reflected her capabilities, that checking targets and logging scores was the extent of her value to this war. Vickers looked between them, then spoke carefully. Sir, Morrison's jacket shows Ranger deployment, Afghanistan 2004 and 2005. Designated marksman, 23 confirmed kills. She cross-trained to Special Forces Sniper School before her assignment here. Kate felt the room shift as Hayes processed information he'd never bothered to learn. He'd seen her personnel file reduced to a single line, Range Safety Officer. Everything before that assignment had been irrelevant to him because her current role was all that mattered. Now that role was suddenly inadequate for the situation they faced, and he was realizing he'd never looked deeper. Another explosion rocked the compound, closer this time. Dust rained from the ceiling. The radio crackled with urgent voices. The western perimeter team was falling back. The enemy was pressing through the breach, consolidating positions for a push into the compound interior. Hayes had seconds to decide. Kate kept her voice level, professional. Sir, I can make those shots. The range tower gives me elevation and cover. I can suppress their flanking positions and cover the QRF's movement. You need a sniper on station right now, and I'm the only one available. Her tone wasn't pleading, wasn't aggressive, just stating tactical reality. Hayes stared at her for 3 seconds that felt like minutes. She could see the calculation behind his eyes, pride versus necessity, assumptions versus the reality that his designated marksman was bleeding in the aid station and the enemy was inside the wire. Finally, he nodded once, sharp and reluctant. Take the tower. Vickers, go with her. Spot and provide security. Morrison, you call your shots, you confirm targets, you follow ROE. This isn't the time for proving anything. The implication stung, but Kate ignored it. She had work to do, and his opinion would change, or it wouldn't, based on what happened in the next hour. Kate and Vickers moved through the compound at a tactical run, staying low, using structures for cover. Rounds impacted around them, kicking up dirt and sparking off metal. The range tower was a reinforced concrete structure she'd insisted on during construction, designed to handle the blast pressure if anyone ever accidentally cooked off ammunition during training. Now that over-engineering was about to become a combat position, they reached the base and climbed the external stairs, emerging onto the platform 30 feet above ground level. The entire battlefield spread before them in the green glow of her night vision. Kate set up quickly, using sandbags she'd positioned months ago for training purposes. The M110 settled into her shoulder with familiar comfort, the weapon's weight and balance as natural as breathing. Vickers positioned beside her with a spotting scope and radio. Below and around them, the compound was a landscape of fire and movement. Muzzle flashes from enemy positions, tracers cutting through darkness, the burning vehicle at the western breach casting orange light across shattered concrete. She controlled her breathing, let training take over. Felt the transformation from range instructor back to what she'd been before, a hunter with targets and a mission. Vickers scanned through his optic, calling out targets with professional precision. Northwest building, 2nd floor, 3 shooters engaging our QRF. Range 520 meters, wind negligible, temperature cold. Kate acquired the first target, a figure silhouetted against a window, muzzle flash bright in her scope. She exhaled slowly, let her heart rate settle, found the space between beats where the world narrowed to crosshairs, and target. The M110 bucked against her shoulder. Through the scope, she watched the insurgent drop. Hit, Vickers confirmed. Target down? Kate was already transitioning to the second shooter. She worked methodically, the way her instructors had trained her years ago at Fort Benning. Acquire, assess, breathe, squeeze. The second insurgent fell backward from the window. The third tried to relocate after seeing his companions drop. But Kate tracked his movement and put a round through the doorway where he'd repositioned. 3 shots, 3 targets eliminated in 45 seconds. Below, the QRF began moving from the motor pool, using the suppression to advance toward better positions. Vickers radioed the TOC. Overwatch active, northwest position neutralized. QRF is mobile. Hayes' voice came back, clipped and surprised. Copy. Continue. Kate shifted her aim to the eastern fence line where thermal imagery had shown enemy positions. Through her night vision, she could see figures moving along the perimeter, trying to flank the compound's defenders. These were longer shots, 600 meters through darkness, but the range tower's elevation gave her the angle. She led the first target slightly, accounting for his movement across her field of view. The round caught him center mass. He collapsed into the dirt. His companion froze, trying to locate where the shot had originated. Kate's second round answered his question terminally. The remaining insurgents on that side went to ground, their advance halted. The enemy commander was competent. Kate had to give him that. Within minutes of her intervention, their fire patterns changed. They'd identified the range tower as a threat and began directing suppressive fire toward her position. Rounds impacted the concrete walls, ricocheted off the metal roof, forced her and Vickers to stay low behind the sandbags. "They're not happy with you," Vickers said with dark humor, pressed against the wall as bullets snapped overhead. Kate waited for the volume to slacken, then popped up and acquired a target who'd exposed himself while firing at her position. The irony wasn't lost on her. He'd gotten her attention exactly as intended, just not with the results he'd planned. The firefight developed into a rhythm. Kate would identify targets threatening the compound's defenders, eliminate them, draw fire, relocate to different firing positions within the tower, then re-engage. Vickers kept up a steady stream of information: ranges, wind calls, target identification, radio updates to the TOCs. They worked like a trained team, despite never having operated together before, falling into the synchronization that came from professional competence and shared purpose. Below them, the SEAL QRF had regained initiative, pushing toward the western breach with covering fire that was now effective because Kate had eliminated the insurgents who'd been pinning them down. Kate's scope found an insurgent setting up a PKM machine gun on a rooftop 400 meters north. The weapon would have devastating fields of fire across the compound's interior once operational. She put 2 rounds into the gunner before he could charge the weapon. His assistant tried to take over the gun. Kate shot him too. A third insurgent attempted to drag the PKM to safety. She let him move it 3 feet before dropping him, ensuring the weapon stayed where the compound's defenders could suppress anyone else who tried to reach it. Vickers marked it on the tactical net. Enemy crew-served weapon neutralized, north position. 30 minutes into the engagement, Kate had fired 68 rounds and eliminated 17 targets. Her shoulder ached from recoil. Her eyes burned from staring through the night vision, but her hands remained steady. This was what she'd trained for, what she'd done in Afghanistan before some personnel officer decided she'd be more valuable running a range than running missions. The muscle memory was still there. The skills sharp, despite 3 years of checking targets instead of eliminating them. Vickers changed her magazines when she ran dry, keeping her in the fight. "You're making them reconsider their life choices," he said, pressing a fresh mag into her palm. Hayes' voice came across the radio, different now, lacking the dismissive edge from the talk. "Overwatch. Western breach is secured. QRF needs suppression on the northern perimeter. Multiple targets attempting to retreat with wounded." Kate swung her rifle north, acquiring fleeing figures in the green wash of her optic. Standard rules of engagement. Enemy combatants remained valid targets until they surrendered or were no longer a threat. These fighters were conducting a tactical withdrawal, weapons still in hand, still dangerous. She began dropping them at range, methodical and dispassionate. This wasn't personal. This was mathematics. Reducing enemy combat effectiveness 1 target at a time. An RPG streaked toward the ranged tower, the rocket motor bright against the darkness. Kate had half a second of warning before it impacted 20 feet below their position, the explosion shaking the structure and filling the air with concrete dust and shrapnel. Vickers grunted, hit by debris but still functional. Kate's ears rang, but her hands stayed on the rifle. Through the dust, she found the RPG shooter reloading in a ditch 300 meters out. She put a round through his chest before he could fire again. The launcher tumbled into the dirt beside his body. "Still in the fight," Vickers confirmed, checking himself for serious wounds and finding none. The enemy assault was breaking apart. Kate could see it through her scope. The coordinated attack degrading into scattered resistance as their casualties mounted and their tactical positions collapsed. What had been an organized push into the compound was now insurgents retreating, dragging wounded, abandoning equipment. The compound's defenders pressed their advantage, the SEALs moving with lethal efficiency now that the suppressing fire had been eliminated. Kate continued to engage targets of opportunity, covering the friendly advance, denying the enemy any chance to regroup or establish new firing positions. The battle wasn't over, but its outcome was no longer in doubt. By the time the sun began to gray the eastern horizon, the firing had stopped. Kate's final count was 23 confirmed kills, 4 probables, and multiple targets suppressed or wounded. The compound had held. Enemy bodies lay scattered across the perimeter and in the surrounding buildings, evidence of an assault that had cost the insurgents dearly. The SEAL QRF was conducting clearing operations, ensuring no fighters remained hiding in the rubble. Kate safed her weapon and stood slowly, her legs stiff from 2 hours in shooting positions. Vickers looked at her with something approaching awe. "That was the most professional shooting I've ever witnessed," he said quietly. They descended from the tower into a changed world. The compound was battle-scarred, burning vehicles, cratered earth, bullet-marked walls, blood trails leading into the darkness beyond the wire. The cost had been real. 3 friendly wounded, none critical, and one of the guard towers was destroyed. But they'd held against a force that had intended to overrun them completely. SEALs moved through the dawn light with the purposeful efficiency of post-combat operations, securing weapons, documenting enemy casualties, establishing security perimeters. Kate walked toward the TOC to debrief, her rifle slung, exhaustion beginning to settle into her bones now that adrenaline was fading. Hayes met her outside the operations center. His face was smudged with dirt and gunpowder residue, his expression complex, respect mixed with something that might have been embarrassment. "Morrison," he said, then stopped, seeming to search for words. Kate waited, too tired for whatever conversation was coming. Finally, Hayes continued, "Your shooting saved this compound. The QRF couldn't advance until you eliminated those positions. Multiple SEALs are alive right now because you were in that tower." He extended his hand. Kate shook it, the gesture formal but genuine. Progress, she thought, even if it took a firefight to earn basic recognition of her capabilities. The intelligence officer arrived an hour later, documenting the engagement for after-action reports. He interviewed Kate in the TOC, recording her target sequence, shot placement, tactical decisions. 23 confirmed was a significant number for a single engagement, enough to draw attention from higher command. "This will go up the chain," the intel officer said, making notes. "Silver Star recommendation at minimum, possibly higher. You effectively neutralized half the enemy force and enabled the successful defense of this FOP." Kate nodded, accepting the information without emotion. She hadn't been fighting for medals. She'd been fighting because that was the job, the mission, what her training had prepared her to do. The story spread through the base by midday, passed among the soldiers and SEALs, with the speed of legend forming in real time. The range safety instructor who'd dropped 23 insurgents, the quiet warrant officer they'd dismissed, who'd turned out to be one of the deadliest shooters any of them had seen operate. Kate noticed the changes immediately, the way personnel stepped aside when she walked past, the nods of respect, the requests from SEALs to review their shooting techniques with newfound seriousness. She was no longer invisible, no longer just support staff occupying space until rotation. One firefight had rewritten every assumption they'd made about her. 3 days after the attack, a colonel from JSOC arrived at the compound via Blackhawk. Kate was running afternoon qualifications when he appeared at the range, accompanied by Hayes, who looked distinctly uncomfortable. Colonel Brennan was Special Forces, his uniform showing deployment patches from every major theater in the past 15 years. He watched Kate coach a young SEAL through breathing techniques for 20 minutes before approaching. "Warrant Officer Morrison," he said, his tone carrying the weight of someone who'd reviewed her complete file, not just her current assignment. "I'd like to discuss your operational history and your future with this task force." They sat in the TOC conference room, just the three of them. Brennan laid out papers, Kate's full-service record, the after-action report from the firefight, recommendations from Vickers and 2 other SEALs, and something new, orders reassigning her to a sniper position with a direct action team. "We've been wasting your capabilities," Brennan said bluntly, looking at Hayes as much as Kate. "You were put on range duty because someone decided that was appropriate for a female warrant officer, regardless of your operational background. The attack 3 days ago demonstrated what happens when we let assumptions override combat effectiveness." Hayes had the grace to look uncomfortable with this assessment. Kate listened as Brennan outlined the new assignment. She'd be integrated into a special operations team conducting high-value target operations throughout the region. Sniper support for direct action missions, exactly the type of work she'd done in Afghanistan before her reassignment to this backwater range instructor position. It was everything she'd wanted for 3 years. Validation that her skills still mattered in this war, but there was a cost. "This recommendation only exists because you performed in combat," Brennan continued. "You had to prove yourself in a firefight to get recognition that should have been given based on your record. That's a failure of the system, and I'm addressing it." After Brennan left, Hayes remained in the conference room with Kate. The silence stretched between them, heavy with things unspoken. Finally, Hayes said, "I judged you based on your current billet. I saw range safety and assumed that's all you were. I didn't look deeper because I didn't think I needed to." Kate met his eyes, kept her voice level. "You saw a woman in a support role and decided that defined my capabilities. You had my full record available. You chose not to look." The words were simple statement of fact, not accusation, but they landed with weight. Hayes nodded slowly, accepting the truth of it. Kate spent the next week transitioning her range responsibilities to her replacement, a senior NCO who actually wanted the position. She trained him on procedures, showed him the equipment maintenance schedules, passed along the small improvements she'd made to the facility. It was strange, preparing to leave a job she'd resented for so long. The range had been exile, punishment disguised as assignment, 3 years of professional stagnation, but it had also kept her sharp in its own way, the endless repetition of marksmanship fundamentals, ensuring that when the moment came, her skills were ready. Sometimes exile prepared you for the return better than you expected. The night before she transferred to the direct action team, Kate walked the perimeter of the compound alone. The damage from the attack had been repaired, new guard towers erected, the western breach filled and reinforced, fresh sandbags stacked where explosions had scattered the old ones. The range tower stood silent in the darkness, its concrete walls still scarred with bullet impacts. She climbed the stairs one final time, stood where she'd stood during the firefight, looked out across the same field of fire. The memory was vivid. The scope's green glow, the controlled breathing, the mechanical process of eliminating targets. That night had changed everything, though part of her resented that it had been necessary. Vickers found her there an hour later. He'd brought coffee, the terrible stuff they brewed in the TOC that tasted like diesel fuel, but contained enough caffeine to power a convoy. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the darkness beyond the wire. "The new guys don't realize what happened here," Vickers finally said. "They see the patched walls, but they don't understand how close it was. Without you in this tower, the compound falls. We'd have been overrun before reinforcements arrived." Kate sipped the bitter coffee. Someone would have made those shots. There were other shooters available. Vickers shook his head. "No, there were shooters. There weren't snipers. There's a difference." Her gear was packed by 0600, everything combat-ready and stripped of unnecessary weight. The Black Hawk arrived at 0800, rotors beating the air into submission, dust swirling across the landing pad. Kate loaded her equipment, her rifle case, the accumulated tools of her trade. Hayes was there to see her off, along with a dozen SEALs who decided her departure warranted acknowledgement. It was a strange moment, this recognition from men who'd barely noticed her existence 2 weeks ago. Hayes saluted, formal and proper. "Good hunting, warrant officer. Make them remember why they should have paid attention earlier." Kate returned the salute, then climbed aboard the aircraft. The helicopter lifted, banking over the compound. From the air, Kate could see the entirety of the base. The range where she'd spent 3 years teaching fundamentals, the TOC where she'd been dismissed until necessity changed minds, the tower where she'd proven what should never have needed proving. The battlefield was still visible, scorched earth and disturbed dirt marking where the attack had failed. She felt no particular satisfaction looking at it, no sense of triumph, just the quiet acknowledgement that competence had finally been recognized. Even if recognition had required blood to arrive, the compound fell away behind them, shrinking into the Afghan landscape of dust and stone. The new base was 40 kilometers north, larger and more fortified, home to a joint special operations task force that conducted missions across 3 provinces. Kate was introduced to her new team, 8 operators, all male, all with the weathered look of men who'd spent years in combat. Their team leader was a master sergeant named Cordero, Special Forces, 20 years in service. He looked at Kate's record, then at Kate herself, and said, "I don't care what chromosomes you have. I care if you can make the shot when it matters. Your record says you can. Prove it true, and we'll get along fine." It was the most honest welcome she'd received in 3 years. The team's first mission together came 72 hours later. A high-value target compound in the mountains, intelligence indicating a Taliban commander responsible for coordinating attacks across the region. Kate would provide overwatch from a ridgeline 800 meters from the objective, while the assault element breached and cleared the target building. The infiltration was a 6-hour foot movement through darkness, each operator carrying 70 pounds of gear across terrain that tried to kill you with every step. Kate matched their pace without complaint, her boots finding purchase on the same rocks, her breathing controlled despite the altitude. Cordero noticed, gave her an approving nod when they reached the overwatch position. Kate established her hide site as dawn approached, camouflaging her position among the rocks and sparse vegetation. The target compound lay below in a valley, 3 buildings surrounded by walls, vehicles parked in a courtyard, armed guards visible on rooftop positions. Through her scope, she catalogued everything: fields of fire, blind spots, potential threat positions, escape routes. The assault element was positioned 400 meters south, waiting for full daylight when their intelligence indicated the target would be present. Kate's role was surgical: eliminate sentries on her signal, then provide precision fire support if the mission went wrong. Professional work, the kind she'd trained for, the kind she'd been denied for too long. At 0620, Cordero's voice came through her earpiece. "Overwatch, you have authorization to engage sentries. Execute on your count." Kate acquired the first guard, a man with an AK-47 walking the north wall, unaware these were his final moments. She controlled her breathing, found the stillness between heartbeats, pressed the trigger. The suppressed rifle coughed quietly. Through the scope, she watched the guard collapse. She transitioned immediately to the second sentry on the opposite rooftop. Acquire, breathe, squeeze. He dropped without firing a shot. 2 targets eliminated in 8 seconds. "Sentries down," she reported. Compound blind. Execute assault. Below, the team moved like shadows toward their target. The breach was textbook. Explosive charge on the door, operators flooding through the opening, systematic clearing of rooms. Kate watched through her scope, tracking windows and doorways, ready to engage any threats that appeared. 30 seconds into the assault, an insurgent emerged from a secondary building, raising an RPG toward the breach point. Kate's round caught him in the chest before he could fire, the rocket launcher falling unfired. Another fighter appeared in a window, trying to flank the assault element. Kate dropped him with a headshot. She was their guardian angel, their invisible protection, eliminating threats they couldn't see coming. The mission lasted 4 minutes. The target was captured alive, 3 enemy fighters killed, 0 friendly casualties. The extraction was clean, the team moving back through the mountains with their prisoner secured and valuable intelligence recovered. Back at base, during the debrief, Cordero pulled up the mission footage from helmet cameras. The team watched Kate's shots, the precision, the timing, the way she'd eliminated threats before they could materialize into actual danger. One of the operators, a quiet ranger named Chen, said, "I didn't even see that RPG shooter until he was already down. You saved my life without me knowing I was in danger." Kate accepted the acknowledgement with a simple nod. This was what competence looked like when it was finally allowed to operate. Missions succeeding, teammates staying alive, the job done right. 6 weeks and 11 missions later, Kate was called to the command building. Colonel Brennan was there, along with a general she didn't recognize and a Pentagon liaison wearing civilian clothes. They had her complete operational file displayed, Afghanistan tours, sniper certifications, the compound defense, every mission with Cordero's team. The general spoke first. "Warrant Officer Morrison, your operational performance has been exceptional. You're being considered for a new training program, advanced sniper instruction for special operations personnel. You'd be one of 3 lead instructors, responsible for developing the next generation of precision shooters across all service branches. The Pentagon wants the best. Your record indicates that's you." It was everything she'd worked for. Validation at the highest level, recognition that her skills mattered beyond individual missions. But Kate found herself hesitating. Training was important, vital even, but it was also taking her out of the fight, removing her from operations where she could make immediate tactical impact. The general seemed to read her thoughts. "This isn't exile disguised as promotion," he said. "This is leveraging your capabilities to multiply combat effectiveness across the entire special operations community. You'll still deploy, still operate, but you'll also ensure hundreds of other shooters are trained to your standard. That's strategic impact, Warrant Officer. That's how one sniper changes the entire battlefield." Before she gave her answer, Kate returned to Cordero's team for one final mission. A compound raid on a Taliban explosives facility. She took her position on Overwatch as the sun set. The familiar ritual of preparing her hide site, checking equipment, cataloging targets. The mission went as planned. Her precision fire eliminated sentries and threats. The assault element destroyed the facility and recovered intelligence. Everyone extracted safely. Afterward, Cordero said, "You're the best I've worked with in 20 years. Whatever comes next, don't let them waste that." Kate understood then that training wasn't waste if done right, if it created more shooters like her, if it ensured competence was recognized and developed regardless of politics or assumptions. The ceremony was small, held at the main operations base, with only essential personnel present. General Mitchell pinned the silver star on Kate's uniform, his voice formal as he read the citation. "Distinguished gallantry in action, exceptional precision fire that saved American lives and ensured mission success during the compound defense." Hayes was there, watching from the assembled formation. Afterward, he approached her privately, away from the crowd. "I owe you an apology that goes beyond words," he said. "I saw what I expected to see instead of what was actually in front of me. I let assumptions override evidence and it almost cost lives. You deserved better from the beginning. I'm sorry it took a firefight to make me see clearly." Kate accepted the new assignment, understanding finally that some battles were won with bullets and others were won by changing the system itself. She would train the next generation of snipers, ensuring that competence was recognized from the start, that operators were judged by capability rather than assumptions. The range had been exile. The compound defense had been vindication. This new role was something different, the chance to ensure others wouldn't need to prove themselves through blood when their records should have been proof enough. She packed her gear one final time, her rifle case worn from years of deployment, and prepared to fight a different kind of war. Some victories were measured in targets eliminated, others were measured in minds changed, systems reformed, barriers broken. Both mattered, both were worth fighting for.
ওই বিশাল বিশাল হাট তুই থাকলে জমজমাট